Ah, shit. The two faces sitting opposite me in the booth looked up at my curse, staring with quizzical amusement. The first, an extremely attractive-looking woman of about 19, she smirked as she saw me gazing at my watch. "What's the matter, Billy?" she asked, her voice carrying the thick British accent which I had become used to for the last few weeks. "You gonna turn back into a pumpkin at midnight?" Her companion, a guy about the same age, choked slightly on the pint of beer he'd been downing, dropping it to the wooden table with a clunk. He wiped at his mouth with the sleeve of his jumper, still spluttering. For my part, I simply continued to stare at my watch as if willing the two hands to begin running backward. Finally, I lowered it and stared at the two. "I didn't realise how friggin' late it got," I said, my mind beginning to race. The woman, Courtney, gave a small shrug. "So, what's the big deal? We've already paid for our drinks before the locking began, and it's not like we're going to be booted out anytime soon." I shook my head. "You don't get it. I promised my folks I'd get my ass back no later than 12:30. This is the first time they'd ever let me stay out so late. If I don't get back there, I'm toast." Both of them let out barks of laughter. "What is it with American parents being such bloody killjoys?" Eric asked. I had no answer to give them. I simply shook my head as I slid to my feet, the world tilting slightly from the alcohol in my system. "I honestly don't know, man, but I do know I've got to vamoose before I end up screwed, especially if the three of us still want to hit the movies this weekend." At my words, Courtney jerked her head up to look at me. A sly smile slowly slid across her face, and she leaned over slightly, sliding her hand on top of mine as her blue eyes twinkled. "Then you'd better get yourself home, ain't you?" she said, her voice taking on a slightly husky tone. "Because your cute ass is going to pictures with me to see Godzilla one way or another." I felt my cheeks burn slightly at the flirt and then found my voice. "Yeah, I should. You have the phone number and address I gave you." She nodded, pulling a folded sheet of paper from her jacket pocket. Satisfied and with a final exchange of "later," I slung my backpack over my shoulder and passed down through hazy clouds of cigarette smoke, headed for the exit. As soon as I stepped outside, I was hit with a torrent of rain. Oh, great. Still downpouring. Sighing, I flipped the collar of my leather jacket up and began jogging. It was the summer of '98, and my parents had decided to take my two younger siblings and I to see our aunt and uncle in London. It was our first time visiting another country, and to me at least it felt like visiting a parallel dimension, one where the same language was spoken, but everything else was different. At first, I loved the tours of places like the Tower of London and St. Paul's Cathedral, but I quickly grew tired of it, wanting to get out on my own and experience it as only an 18-year-old on the loose could. After much pleading and promising to behave, I'd finally been given the go-ahead. I was given £50 to spend along with the fare for the trains and buses and told to have fun, but Mother had begun, her tone deadly serious. "Your father and I expect you to be back here no later than 12:30. You break curfew and you can forget being let out on your own again while we're here. Am I clear?" I'd just agreed, nodding enthusiastically, promising I would, and in truth, I'd fully intended to keep my word. I just hadn't intended on meeting Courtney and Eric in the Trafalgar Square. But when I'd locked eyes with a blonde bombshell across the square, sitting on the edge of the fountain, dressed in a tight skirt, I couldn't resist. The three of us spent the day walking around the city, hitting up stores, and eventually ending up at a pub where they're both delighted in buying me my first ever legal beer. Now I'm here running around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to find a way back to Chelsea before I end up dead meat. I shook my head, trying to clear the slight fuzziness in my vision as I raced towards the bright lights and blaring car horns of Piccadilly Circus. A moment later, I was awash in the neon signs advertising Foster's Beer, Sanyo Electronics and Coca-Cola. This late night at the square had emptied out considerably through a number of people still streamed around, their faces hidden under umbrellas as they pushed past me. My eyes flickered to a red double-decker bus as it passed by, then a black cab which was letting out the most goth couple I'd ever seen. I felt a slight anxiety, even though I knew full well I was legally able to drink, years ahead of being raised in the States, and constantly reminded of what it would happen if we were caught drinking before turning 21 gnawed at me. I don't exactly feel comfortable taking a cab a bit tipsy, and don't even know how to get one of the buses to stop. Feeling the anxiety began to fill me as I glanced at my watch. I spared a final look around. That's when my eyes fell upon the sign for the Underground across from me. As soon as I spied the large red circle with the white lettering showing the way, I remembered the ticket in my pocket. Of course, I took it to get here, and since it's an all-day ticket, I can use it until midnight. My mind made up, I stopped to let a jeep pass through the intersection, then jogged across to the stairs. As I reached the top, I stopped to spare one final glance around. Despite the time crunch, I smiled, almost feeling truly like an adult for the first time in my life. "See you tomorrow," I whispered it to nobody in particular, and then hurried down the steps. The sounds of the world above dulled as I entered the hallway, my footsteps echoing off the tile walls. Passing the posters for plays and movies, I followed the winding path until it opened into a large welcome area. As I entered, I was hit by a small wave of surprise. Where the hell is everybody? Even this late at night, and with the amount of activity above, I expected there to be at least a few people rushing for a train home. But as I stared around the large, circular room, I saw no sign of life. The only sound was the soft hum of the fluorescent lights on the walls and columns. I gazed around for a moment longer, then began walking, my footfalls echoing loudly back at me. Fumbling into the pocket of my jeans, I retrieved the crumpled ticket, smoothing it out as best I could as I approached the gates to the platforms. "Oi!" The call from behind me made me freeze for a moment, all semblance of thought fleeing. Oh shit, man. Memories of my mother talking about taking the New York subway as a teenager flooded my mind. Stories about having to watch out for armed robbers who'd corner helpless passengers and steal everything from them at knife point. I began to speed walk towards the gates. "Stop!" I forced myself to turn towards the voice and began to softly laugh, filling with relief at the sight of what had to be a metro cop striding towards me. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, strands of brown hair peeking from under his cap. I shot a look at the name stamped into his vest. D. Gittins. As he approached, he caught sight of the look on my face, and the hardened expression he wore softened as he raised his hands. "Oh, apologies. I startle you?" Still chuckling, I nodded, swallowing before answering. "Honestly, yeah, you did, officer. I didn't see anyone else down here who entered." I gave a strange smile. It kind of scared the hell out of me. He let out a chuckle of his own, and he finished making his way over to me and flashed a smile. "You're an American tourist, aren't you? Your accent gives it away." I nodded again. "Yes, sir." Turning, he pointed at the clock hanging from the ceiling. "Well, you might not know it, lad, but station closes in about 20 minutes. The Underground doesn't run after midnight or so." A small spike of worry rose at these words. "Crap. It doesn't?" I asked. He shook his head, rubbing his beard as he looked at me. "Where do you need going to?" "I need back to Chelsea. I took a train from Sloane Square, but that was a different line than this, I think." At my words, a pleased look crossed the officer's face. "Oh, you might actually be in luck," he said, pointing at the signs over the escalators heading further down. "The Piccadilly line doesn't stop at Sloane, but it does stop at South Kensington. It's roughly a 10-minute walk from Chelsea." Last train for the Bakerloo line's already gone, mate, but there's one final westbound train for Piccadilly line in about 10 minutes. If you hurry now, you should make it. Just follow the signs. I gave a sigh of relief and nodded, this time giving the cop a genuine smile. Thank you so much, sir. He nodded and then motioned for me to hurry. Giving him one final look, I turned and stepped up to the gate, sliding my ticket into the slot. It spat it back out, and I quickly slid through and jogged to the escalator. Stepping onto it, I leaned against the railing and closed my eyes. The rhythmic, metallic clang filled my ears, and I descended, opening them as I felt it level out. I stepped off and hurried down the corridor. There were 3 hallways that branched off the main one. The one to the right was already barred by a gate, the same with the left branch of a fork straight ahead, which left only one choice. Well, I guess I'm going this way. Taking the hallway to the right, I turned left and descended a set of steps. A moment later, I stepped out onto an empty train platform. I felt another wave of confusion. The sign at the top of the stairs said this was the Bakerloo platforms. But the cop said to follow the signs for the Piccadilly line. Where the hell am I supposed to go? The answer came as I turned to the left, spying the sign which pointed into yet another hallway. I muttered, feeling a bit sheepish. I started towards it, feeling a bit more sure that I could make it back in time to my aunt and uncle's house on Burnsall Street. Scrape. I stopped almost mid-step as the sound came. It echoed off the tiled walls of the station for a moment, and then died away. For a moment I simply stared ahead, waiting to see if anyone would emerge, but nothing moved in the stillness. Come on, dude, you gotta get to the other platform before the train arrives. I began to move forward again, my boots clapping on the floor. Scrape. This time, I froze like a statue. The first time the sound had come, I couldn't figure out exactly where it had originated. The echo had been distorted. But this time, it had been much clearer. It had come from ahead, seeming where the empty platform disappeared round a bend. I felt my pulse quicken slightly and swallowed. For a moment, I contemplated saying nothing. Then I spoke. Hello? My voice echoed off the walls, bouncing back as it died away. Why the hell did you just do that? Haven't you seen enough horror movies? But I shook my head, pushing the thought away. This is real life, it's not a movie. For a moment I continued to stand there, waiting. Nobody answered my call. A mental image of the cop flashed through my mind. Maybe he came down a set of stairs for employees, making sure I'm not going to spray paint the walls or anything. The thought made me call out again. Officer, is that you? Again, my voice echoed away into the emptiness, dying away and answered by no one. As I stared, a feeling suddenly fell over me, one that alone on the platform was not pleasant in the least. The feeling of being watched. I felt my pulse begin to quicken as it grew, to make sure I wasn't being snuck up on, but nobody emerged from the hall behind me. I swung my gaze back, feeling a mixture of wariness and trepidation, and then a sudden loud noise caused me to jump, my heart almost stopping as a booming man's voice shattered the silence. Attention! The final westbound Piccadilly line train will arrive at the station in 3 minutes. I repeat, the final westbound Piccadilly train will arrive in 3 minutes. The sound of the intercom clicked off, and I let out a low, soft laugh as the realization hit me. Bending over and putting my hands on my knees, freaking hell, man. After a moment, I stood back up straight and headed for the hall. As I reached it, I spared one final look down the hall. That noise had to be a fucking rat or something. You're getting way too jumpy, Billy. Shaking my head, I entered the hallway, quickly descending a final set of stairs. Briefly scanning the two maps, I found Skelf Kensington on the right and stepped onto the platform. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was now midnight. The map had said that my stop was only a few stations ahead. That meant a train ride of only about 5 to 10 minutes. After that, it was a quick climb topside and, according to the cop, another 5-minute walk to Chelsea. I'll be home well before curfew. Smiling, I walked over to a bench and sat down, placed my backpack in my lap and waited. Inside the pack I had a Sony Discman for which I'd purchased 2 CDs while out with my new friends. But I'd made the decision to wait until I was on the train before breaking it out. As sure as I felt the noise had been something harmless, I didn't want to deafen myself. Not yet. Glancing at my watch, I saw a minute had passed. Feels like hours instead of seconds. Sighing, I leaned back and closed my eyes, only to hear the sound of a scrape. My eyes flew open again as the sound, now distant and echoing from the upper platform, filtered down to me. I slowly turned my head, looking towards the out-of-sight alcove about 50 feet to my right. A moment later it came again. I snorted, shaking my head. See, it's either a rat or just the sounds of the underground late at night. But as much as I repeated the thought over and over, I couldn't quite make myself believe it. I can't say why, but it just sounded off. As the noise came a third time, something occurred to me. Is it just me, or is that getting louder? I glanced at my watch again. Another minute had passed. If the announcer had been correct, the train would be pulling into the station in about 60 seconds. Oh, thank God. I began to stand, but froze as a new sound came. Thunk. Every muscle in my body tensed, and I flashed up, lightning quick. What the... For a moment the air remained still. Then... thunk. I suddenly felt my blood run cold as it came a third time, my mind rapidly replaying the last few minutes of my journey down. The scraping sound had been one I couldn't place, a sound I'd never heard before and which I couldn't shrug off. But this noise, a very human one, was one I'd not heard not even 3 minutes ago. As I descended down to the platform, it was the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Shit. Now, at 6 foot and well built from years on the swim team, not to mention 3 years of self-defense classes, I felt confident I could hold my own against someone. But the fact I was tipsy and in an unfamiliar place, combined with how brazen whoever it was to not even try and be quiet, was sending off all kinds of alarm bells in my head. A fourth thunk came, and I made a split-second decision, deciding to try and intimidate whoever it might be. I opened my mouth. Okay, whoever's on the stairs, if this is some kind of joke, I can assure you it's not the least bit amusing. Instantly the sound stopped. The platform going silent once more. But this time it wasn't any normal kind of silence. This was one that held a palpably tense atmosphere, one so thick you could have easily cut it with a knife. For what felt like an eternity, but in reality was likely no more than 10 seconds, it hung over my head like a noose. Then I forced myself to speak again, my voice sounding as tough as I could and trying not to slur my words. You keep this up and I'll report this. That is, if I don't kick your fucking ass first. For a few moments there was silence. I couldn't tell if they were attempting to quietly make their way back up the stairs or simply staying still and making their mind up. I shot another glance at my watch. Come on, man, where's the fucking train? As I lifted my head again, the sound suddenly sprang up again, only this time they weren't coming slowly. One after the other, they were coming rapidly. Thunk, 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 thunk. My eyes widened as I suddenly realized how big a mistake I'd made. Oh, you fucking moron, you just pissed them off. I began to backpedal down the platform as the sounds grew closer. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. I kept repeating the two words, fear suddenly coursing through my veins as I reached to the halfway point. They reached the bottom and stopped. I stopped as well, freezing and straining my ears to hear anything. No new sounds disturbed the eerie silence that had descended onto the platform, but all it meant was that the person was standing just out of sight, waiting. For what? The mental question made the fear and anxiety well up like a hot spring as images of being rushed filled my mind. I swallowed hard and took another step back. That was when I felt a large puff of hair hit me, causing me to sway slightly on my feet. It was followed by a loud, echoing sound which rapidly intensified. For a moment I didn't understand what was happening. Then relief like I'd never felt before came as a train burst onto the tunnel, the platform filling with the sound of its brakes. Even so, I kept shooting looks towards the stairs. I gave a silent thanks as I saw nobody appear. The train finally came to a complete stop, the doors opening with a pneumatic whoosh. A speaker inside let out a small ding, followed by a soothing woman's voice. "This train terminates at Heathrow, Terminal 4. I shot another glance down at the other end of the platform, then I began to move towards the open doors. As I was about to enter, something came flying out of nowhere, smacking itself square into my chest. For a moment, panic consumed me before I looked down and let out a shaky chuckle as I realized it was some sort of paper, likely blown about by the train. Pulling it from my chest and holding it in one clenched hand, I spared a final look towards the alcove, and then I quickly stepped inside. The doors slid shut a moment later, the loud humming sound of the train powering back up, filling my ears. Feeling the floor below me jerk slightly, I slid the paper in my pocket and sat down on one of the benches. The platform began sliding by outside, and was replaced a few seconds later by the blackness of the underground tunnels. After a moment, confident that I hadn't been followed, I allowed my shoulders to slump as all the fear and tension I'd felt flowed out of my body like water. A huge sigh escaped my lips. Oh, holy shit, dude. I muttered it softly and let out an equally soft, strained laugh. Oh. Taking another couple of deep breaths, I finally allowed myself to look around. Aside from myself, the car was completely empty. Abandoned newspapers lay where people had discarded them, and what looked like styrofoam coffee cup rolled lazily under one of the patterned seats. Leaning around, I saw through the glass doors to both adjoining cars that they too were empty. "You're safe, man," the thought further reassured me, and I set my backpack aside and stood up, holding on to the metal bar running along the ceiling as I studied the map on the far wall. My eyes moved along the line. "Okay, 3 stops before Kensington," I said, making a mental note of them. Green Park, Hyde Park Corner and Knightsbridge. Sitting back down in my seat, I felt the adrenaline which filled my body at last begin to recede, replaced with a sudden tiredness. I reached over and unzipped my bag, pulling out my Discman and the 2 CDs I'd brought. Depeche Mode or Tears for Fears. I settled on Depeche Mode, popping the CD inside the Discman. Placing the headphones on my head, I hit play, and a moment later my ears were filled with the sound of Dave Gahan's voice as he began to sing World in My Eyes. Leaning back in my seat, I closed my eyes. As I listened, I felt my body rock slightly with the train. I decided that I wouldn't tell my parents what had happened to me. With the way they were, the news that I'd been accosted by an unseen presence would send them off the deep end. I'd absolutely be forgiven from going to movies with Courtney this weekend. Like hell, that's happening. I felt the train begin to slow. Opening my eyes and lifting one headphone, I watched as the empty platform rolled into view. The train stopped and the doors opened. The woman's voice came from the train speakers again. "This is Green Park. Please mind the gap between the train and the platform." After about 10 seconds, the doors closed and the train began to move again. I slid the headphones back over my ear and relaxed again. The process repeated as the train rolled into Hyde Park Station. As the doors closed, I slid the headphones back on and leaned back, closing my eyes as In Joy the Silence began blasting into my ears. One more stop. Thank you. Thank you, God, for watching out for me tonight. Behind my eyelids, I could still faintly see the glow of the lights. As I began to bob my head back and forth to the music, I suddenly realised they had winked out. They came back on a moment later. I guess the London Underground is like the NYC subway. Certain spots they hit and the lights flicker. As the thought finished, they again flickered. In any other situation, and after a lifetime of riding the subway back home, it wouldn't have bothered me. But after my close call, it began to make me feel nervous again. My mind suddenly recalled the paper I'd been hit with, and to try and take my mind off things, I pulled it from my pocket to look at it. It was a programme for a play similar to one my parents and I had received a few nights ago when they dragged me to a theatre in the West End. The top of the programme gave a name of the theatre in dark red font, Her Majesty's Theatre, Haymarket SW1. I swung my gaze down to the title, reading it aloud. Jack Hilton presents Diana Dawes and Dickie Henderson in Remains to be Seen. I shrugged my shoulders. I'd never heard of it before, or either of the actors. Local talent, likely. My eyes fell even further down to the bottom, and I began to read the line which stated its opening date, and froze. I blinked my eyes a few times, as if doing so would change what I saw, but it didn't. The small black lettering remained. First performance, Tuesday, 16th of December, 1952. And that concludes the first half of I Went to London in 1998, Something Terrifying Happened on the Underground, by JL Goodwin. I'm recording the conclusion to this story tomorrow, so there'll be a very short wait for you to get satisfaction. Any feedback, any comments, drop us a like and subscribe. We are a tiny channel and it really helps us out. Thank you, and I'll catch you all on the next one.